My best friend's daddy. Carly was my best friend in the entire world, and I loved our sleepovers, but the worst part was always her dad. He made us stay up late with him and watch Chucky, which I hated, and he refused to cut up my meat for me or let me drink something other than milk, which I also hated, and he always yelled so loudly. Carly's mom took a sleeping pill that conked her out every night at 9 o'clock and was never around to see how he treated us. The first time I stayed the night, I woke up to Lucy, Carly's baby sister, curled up against my side. I was confused, since she wasn't there when I fell asleep, but it soon became a habit for Lucy. Any time I stayed the night, she would sneak into the room after we fell asleep and huddle up against me. Carly hated having Lucy around, but I didn't mind her presence. I was the baby in my family, so it felt fun to pretend I had my own little sister. After a while, I started making room for her on the bottom bunk with me, even scooting over so she would have more space. She always slept plastered to my back though. It was maybe the 5th or the 6th night I had been staying there when I realized something was wrong. My eyes opened in the darkness, but I couldn't immediately tell the problem. As I tried to roll over, however, I figured out the issue. Lucy had her hands fisted in the fabric of my pajama shirt. She was holding on so tight, my shirt clung to my chest and shoulders painfully. I couldn't move my body, but was able to turn my head just enough to see Lucy out of the corner of my eye. Everything seemed to slow down as I realized Lucy wasn't the only person in the bed with me now. Her daddy was sitting on the corner, smoothing his hand over her hair. "Shh, Lucy, shh," he whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. "Come on, honey, come with me." He slipped his hands under Lucy's body and lifted her from bed. She tugged on my shirt, whimpering. I couldn't tell if she was awake or not, since it was too dark to see her face, but it was clear she didn't want to go with him. "You can come back when we're done," he whispered. "I'll give you some candy after, okay? Just be a good girl for me tonight." My blood ran cold. I was only 10 years old, and I wasn't 100% sure of what was happening, but his voice sounded funny to me. He sounded like my brother's friends when they were talking to cute girls and wanted their attention. But this was Lucy, his daughter. Why did he sound like that? He tugged her again, and she finally let go of my shirt. She mumbled something I couldn't make out, sniffled a little, and then everything was silent as the bedroom door shut behind him. I stayed up for what felt like hours, staring at the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what was happening, but everything felt wrong. A while later, the door creaked open again. I heard his heavy footsteps against the floor and hurried to close my eyes. "Here you go, honey," he said, and the bed dipped as he laid Lucy down next to me again. Lucy immediately turned into me. her body a tight, trembling ball against my back. "It's okay, you can stop crying," he said softly, pulling the blanket up over our bodies. "You don't want to wake up Bailey, do you?" She stopped crying, but her body continued to shake violently. Her dad tucked the blanket around us, his hand lingering for a bit too long against my shoulder. He traced one thumb over my collarbone, and my eyes flashed open, seeing nothing but darkness. He squeezed me once, let go, and left the room. Lucy dissolved into tears immediately. Slowly, I turned around to face her. "Are you okay?" I whispered. She just cried harder and burrowed into my chest, her tears soaking my shirt. I held her the entire night, until she finally cried herself to sleep. The next morning, after Lucy had gone with her mom to take a shower and get dressed for the day, I climbed up to Carly's bunk. "I need to talk to you," I said seriously. "Okay," she smiled. "What? Why does your daddy take Lucy at night?" The smile dropped from her face immediately. "What did you see?" "Well, I didn't see it, but—" "You can't tell my mommy," she cut me off. "If you do, we can't be friends anymore." "What? Why?" "Because if you tell my mommy, Daddy will have to go away, and if he goes away, I'll never see him again, and I'll be stuck with my mommy. And I'll hate you, 'cause I don't want Daddy to go away." "Okay," I whispered, nodding. "I won't tell." "So how was Carly's?" my dad asked, as we drove home that day. "Did you have fun?" I shook my head, tears already brimming in my eyes. "No, I hated it, and I never want to go back there." My dad looked at me worriedly. "What happened?" "Well, Carly told me not to tell you." My dad pulled over and turned to face me. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I nodded slowly. "I think." "What is it?" "I think there's something wrong with their daddy." I broke my promise, but Carly kept hers. After the police came and their daddy had to leave, Carly refused to talk to me. She withdrew into herself, abandoning all of our friends as rumors spread about what her daddy had done to Lucy. For being a kid, it was the hardest and bravest thing I had ever done, but I never regretted my choice. Even over a decade later, I can still recall the pain and horror I felt as Lucy finally let go of my shirt and let him take her out of the room. I feel terrible I couldn't help her that night, but I'm proud I stopped him from touching her ever again. I told my dad, who then drove me straight to the police station and sat me down with officers who took my statement. Then my dad decided to call Carly and Lucy's mom, who met us at the station, where they told her what had happened. Because Lucy was very young, I think 5 or 6 at the time, and scared, and didn't want to testify, he did get pleaded down to a lesser charge, spent some time in jail, and was released about 7 years later. Carly ended up moving back in with him, despite everything that had happened, so I assume she still chose to side with him, and I don't hate her for that. It was a messed up situation. She was too young, and although it was never confirmed, I am sure he was abusing her in some ways too, and had conditioned her to only trust him. Lucy and I talked much later, about a year ago. She was about to graduate high school. She's a straight A student, and she confided in me that she was very thankful for me going to my dad, even though at the time she was very confused. She has always been a great kid, and I'm just glad I told her the truth. My creepy daddy. I just recently moved back to my hometown, for reasons irrelevant to the story, but beforehand I was living with my dad in the northern part of the country. This story isn't really one specific time, rather than really creepy things he would do. Like, he was very controlling and sometimes watched me when I slept. I woke up lots of times to see him standing there, and he admitted to it a few times. Not only that, but he kept 3 big knives in an empty drawer of his dresser, and pictures he took of conversations I had with my friends or my boyfriend at the time. Whenever he'd pick me up from school or whatever, he would always full on stare at me when I approached the car, which was a crappy old car that couldn't run for more than 9 miles without breaking down. And just to stare at me, he'd just lower his head to get a better look and watch me. So after a while of this, one day I asked him, "Please don't watch me like that, it makes me uncomfortable." He went on a very loud and angry rampage about how he was my father and how he had the right to stare at me as much as he wanted, and that it wasn't my right to tell him not to. He continued to stare whenever I entered a room, walked outside, came home, slept, everything. On top of this, he was also very misogynistic and sexist, just as his nature, and he often treated me like his little trophy and never trusted what I said because I'm a female and was always on my period or not thinking straight because of my emotions. It may not seem like much, but I only lived with him, no one else, and in close quarters too. So I was very uncomfortable and creeped out by him. My creepy dad. I'm a teen whose parents are divorced, and I live with my mom during the week, since seeing my dad every other weekend. For context, I'm on the autism spectrum, and my special interest is cartoons and animation. For reasons I'll elaborate on later in this often manifests itself as developing crushes on fictional characters. One character it's been in the past is Wilt from Foster's Home, and currently it's Marvin the Martian. I've been noticing for a long time that some of the things my dad say are off in some way, and that he's a lot more irrelevant and immature about sexual topics than my mom is. He seems really interested in my obsessions and enables them a lot, and says he ships me and whatever character I've latched onto most recently. He also makes these weird remarks when my younger brother is around. He said, "Can I sleep over?" in a Wilt voice. Did a Marvin voice where Marvin invited me into his room and said he had lots of Martian toys. The Marvin impression had an intonation that sounded very suggestive. When I made an offhand comment about Marvin's voice being attractive, he said, I don't want to hear about your weird things with voices and getting turned on. When I asked if my obsession with Marvin made him uncomfortable, he said, I don't think about you rolling around with Marvin. That's not something I think about. He makes references to Looney Tunes After Dark in a deep jazzy voice a lot. When I asked where the voice came from, he showed me a video of a character from South Park as an example, and the video contained explicit dialogue. Also makes references to Wilt After Dark a lot. When I said I was going to take a nap, he asked, is that code for teeny inappropriate stuff? When I mentioned my mom had walked in on me drawing sexual art of Marvin and Mello, my character asked, how bad was it? Could you see all the private parts and stuff? Does Marvin impressions where Marvin invites me into his room a lot. He tries to cover his tracks whenever he makes an innuendo by basically saying, I meant, I don't know what you were implying. He's been doing this weird stuff and making sexual remarks since I was around 11 and starting to go through puberty. He also has little to no internet filters at his house and has allowed me to find pornography related to my hyperfixations by accident on the internet since I was 9 years old. I suspect part of the reason why my hyperfixations always seem to go in a sexual direction is due to his material I've been exposed to and his remarks and attitude at a very young age. I've told my mom and my therapist about it, and the report was made to my high school social worker, and they're starting an investigation with CPS. My friend's dad. When I was 16, during the summer before I went to college, I spent a lot of time with one of my friends. One night we arranged sleepovers where we could binge watch a show called The 100. I'm just going to add that her dad had always given me really creepy vibes. For example, my friend once told me that her dad thought I was pretty, which even she said was strange, because he doesn't normally say things like that about her friends. Me and my friend ended up sitting in the driveway of her house with her dad and a few of his friends when her dad asked for my help with something and I agreed, not really thinking much of it. He grabbed my wrist, which automatically made me feel uneasy, and leads me through the side gate towards the back garden and towards a caravan. When I asked what we were doing, he just said, going in there, gesturing towards the caravan, and when I asked why, he said, because there's a bed in there. I stopped walking and almost had a panic attack right then and there, muttering that I didn't want to, which made him laugh and say, I'm kidding, we are just getting some chairs. Which we did, but I waited outside while he passed them to me. Later that night, when me and my friends are watching TV, he comes in and says to my friend that he scared me earlier by taking me to the caravan, leaving out the part where he acted like a complete creep. He said I freaked out over nothing and joked about it. I didn't sleep that night and didn't tell anyone for years, thinking I was just being weird. When I eventually told my best friend about it, she agreed it was weird and creepy, and when I told a friend whose house I had been at when it happened, she just laughed it off, saying, Yeah, he thinks he's funny like that. My creepy father. My biological father wasn't in my life until I was 23. When my parents split up, he took my brother. My mom took me, and we lived in the opposite side of the country. My brother would come visit every summer. Growing up, I never received birthday cards or calls from my father. My brother graduated college and came to live with my family across the country. When my father retired, he came to live in the same city as me and my brother. My mother always taught us to never hate anyone, so I never had any anger towards my father when he arrived. The first year he lived here, he was paying for absolutely everything and bought things like a house for us, cars, iPads and iPhones, even a vacation for the whole family, including my boyfriend at the time, to Disneyland. He was even willing to buy fake boobs when I presented the idea to him. At that time, he lived at my grandma's house, while my brother and I stayed at the house he bought for us. After the first year, I guess he wanted to come live with us, so he did. Now, my boyfriend at the time and I broke up, and sure, I was young and single, so I was seeing a few different guys at that time. He noticed and was pissed off about it, and had a talk with me about it, and how I shouldn't be sleeping with different guys, and things like that. So I slowed down and didn't let any guys over for a few months. Fast forward a month later, I was getting ready for my birthday party in my bathroom when I noticed a small webcam hooked up to the outlet by my mirror. At first I didn't think anything of it. I'm not sure why it didn't faze me. After I was done, I realized what it was and texted my brother asking if he put that in there. He said no, but was just creeped out, just like me, and then went to my dad's room and made sure there were no videos saved, and he said it looked like he was live streaming. Later on, I told my mom, and that's when family secrets started to unravel. I guess he had abused my mom when my brother and I were younger. He would tape her when she was sleeping, he would drug her and record her phone conversations. I remembered before he lived with us, he was telling me about a phone conversation he overheard about my mom and her sister trying to marry a rich guy or something. My brother also told me that he also found recordings on his phone conversations with his friends when he was younger, but also didn't think anything of it. I never slept in that house again. A week later, my mom, brother and I all sat him down to confront him. He was trying to pin everything on me, saying he suspected I was doing drugs in the bathroom, and also I had a lot of guys over, so he wanted proof of it. We tried to scare him, saying I could press charges. I never did anything because I was scared, and honestly he was my brother's dad. I know my brother still was connected to him in some way because he was raised by him, but I know for sure that my brother is nothing like him. I'm glad my brother stood up for me that day though, and believed me. It was 2 years ago, and now we have our own apartment together, and I can finally live in peace without thinking about it. My creepy stepdad. My parents got divorced when I was very little, and my mom remarried and then lived with my stepdad for about 12 years. My dad never ever touched me unless he was giving me a hug, usually a side hug, and never did anything creepy towards me. My stepdad, on the other hand, a total creep asshole. He would watch porn in the living room while my sister and I played in our rooms. He would slide his hands over my developing breasts while he forcefully tickled me. He would make me kiss him if I wanted something, and when I'd give him a peck, he would tell me that wasn't a real kiss, and forcefully stick his tongue in my mouth. He would pinch my butt in front of my mom all the time, as well as slap it. He would also give me hickeys on my neck in front of her. It was much worse when she wasn't around, and I ultimately sent him to prison for child molestation. But man, those were some hard years. I knew him since I was only a couple of months old, and I honestly don't remember him ever not being a creep. My friend's strange dad. From the ages of about 8 to 11, I had a best friend called Jane. I would go to her house to have sleepovers all the time, and I would always get a strange vibe from her father. He was always friendly and nice, but he made me feel slightly uncomfortable, and I always avoided being alone with him in the room. Once, I was over at Jane's house with another friend, and we planned a sleepover. But the other friend ended up leaving, and it was just me and Jane. We had already decided to sleep downstairs, which I felt very weird about, because I always felt like Jane's room was safe, but the living room was an open area. I decided to turn on the waterworks and pretend I had a sore stomach and I needed to go home. Jane ran to get her dad, and when he came in, he told me to stop crying and that I didn't actually have a sore stomach and would stay for the sleepover. This shocked me, as the normal thing to do would be to call my parents, and I was very uncomfortable that this adult was not allowing me to go home. I insisted that I couldn't stay, and he eventually called my dad. Years later, when I was no longer friends with Jane, I found out that she had moved out of her house and accused her dad of abusing her throughout her childhood. Nothing ever happened to me, but I think it could have if I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time.